Good morning. This is Karl Schmidt, retired pastor from Calvary Lutheran Church in Amherst, New York, which is part of Western New York. Well, it's the 13th of September of 2020. Well, we're still in the pandemic, the time of plague, and so we're recording our services because it's simply not safe for us to try to have church in the building. So we're going to have our sermon online. Today's kind of, in Western New York, sort of a rainy, it's getting colder, the season is changing. You can definitely tell we're leaving summer behind, although the leaves haven't started changing yet, but it's getting that fall feel to it this morning. And the dog does not want to go out in the rain for his walk, so he's parked it right behind me here on the floor and decided that's it. Till the rain stops, he's not going out. Well, our text for this morning is from the Gospel of Luke. This is the Trinity 14, the 14th Sunday after the Feast of Holy Trinity. And for the appointed text in the one-year cycle, it's Luke, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. So it's the Gospel of Luke, 17th chapter, verses 11 through 19. And this is the account of Jesus meeting some people who were sick. They happened to be suffering from a nerve disease, leprosy. And it came to pass, as he went to Jerusalem, that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. And he entered into a certain village. There met him 10 men that were lepers, which stood afar off. And they lifted up their voices and said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And when he saw them, he said unto them, Go, show yourselves unto the priests. And it came to pass that as they went, they were cleansed. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back and with a loud voice glorified God, and fell down on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. And he was a Samaritan. And Jesus answering said, Were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? Are there not found that return to give glory to God, save the stranger? And he said unto him, Arise, go thy way. Thy faith hath made thee whole. Here ends that text from the Holy Gospel, from the Gospel of Luke, the 17th chapter, verses 11 through 19. Now, if some of this sounds familiar, it should. They were social distancing. That's what the text is. It's social distancing. They stood afar off, and they're in verse 12. And as I read this, I thought, wow, that's well done. They followed the health rules. This is 2,000 years ago. And even 2,000 years ago, they were smart enough to know that some diseases seem to be contagious. Not that they understood the science behind it, but they were smart enough 2,000 years ago to realize that social distancing was an effective tool to keep them safe. And so they used it rather effectively, I might assume. Well, that's the basis of this text, and which is why I think it's kind of funny that here, 2,000 years later, when we have such advanced science, and yet we have people that are less sensible than people 2,000 years ago. I'm sorry I find this funny, but after 9 months of this absurdities, it's humorous that people 2,000 years ago seem to have more brains than a lot of people today who refuse to social distance or use face masks or whatever because they are less intelligent than people from 2,000 years ago. Okay, well, that aside, there is something in this text that caught my eye, and it's verse 13. It's the response of these men when they realized who was crossing their path. that this one that they'd been hearing a lot about, because anytime there's a cure for something, or someone who can cure something that seems rather incurable, word of it spreads wide and far. Today, these days with internet, all sorts of nonsense gets spread wide and far. Using medicine that is not effective against one disease to treat another. You know, that's really pretty stupid. I mean, you don't do that. I mean, doctors and pharmacists and scientists, they're trained in these things, and they'll tell you what you need as far as medicine. But people with no training, no education, guessing, that's not the path to success here. Well, anyways, these men, they heard through the grapevine that this Jesus had been going around healing people, raising people from the dead, and all sorts of miraculous things. And more than that, they apparently believed Jesus to be the Messiah. And we see that in this verse 13, which says, "And they lifted up their voices and said, 'Jesus, Master, have mercy on us.'" The title that they addressed him with tells me that they saw him as far more than a simple man. Peter used this same title when he and his business partners were out fishing, hadn't caught anything. Jesus came along and told him to push out the boats, and he, Peter and the other fishermen said, "Are you kidding? You're a teacher. What do you know about fishing?" Jesus said, "Push out. I'm going to teach from your boat." So Jesus taught from Peter's boat, and when it was done, he told him to push out to fish. And Peter was like, "We just finished fixing our nets. We haven't got any sleep. You don't know anything about fishing, so tell you what, no." And then Jesus insisted, and so Peter responded with, "Okay, boss, sure." Because his customers were standing around listening, and Peter considered it the expedient thing to do to push out the boats with the nets, even though there's no fish, and go fishing. And of course, you know the rest of the story. The boats nearly sank with so many fish. But at the moment when Peter saw Jesus, he treated him with some level of worldliness and just said, "Okay, boss." Because Peter used the word epistata. Epistata comes from it's a secular term in Greek. If you're Greek speaking, you'll know the word epistata. It comes from, the root is epistemi, one who stands upon or over. Epistemi is to stand. F is a prefix meaning up or upon or over. And so it's literally a secular word for boss. It means one in the workplace who stands over and supervises. We'd probably use the word supervisor, although we still use the common word boss. On the construction site, the boss will yell, "Hey, get your work helmets on. You can't be on work site without work helmets." And they'll say, "All right, boss." It's the same word we use 2,000 years later in the same secular circumstances. There's really nothing religious about this word, except that these people who were suffering from this nerve disease, leprosy, they were calling out to Jesus by name, Jesus. Jesu epistata, they said. They were ascribing to this man, Jesus, a power that only God would have. Now that's startling, very startling. Peter, I'm sure, when he first used the word, later it's funny, Peter continued to use the word several more times with Jesus, and I'm sure since he'd used it rather derogatorily the first time, I'm sure later he used it as a term of affection and endearment. Okay, boss. Meaning that Jesus was his boss. And these men approached Jesus as one who is boss over life and death, over health and illness. And they ask for assistance or help in their case. And Jesus, of course, heals them, gives them help. And they ask for help, eleison. And it's funny, when they call to Jesus, Jesu epistata eleison. Eleison is in the imperative. It means it's the second person singular imperative active, meaning you help me. It's more of a command than a request, isn't it? They're saying, look, if you're the boss, we'd like some help here, so help us. And they call it out from a distance, maintaining the social distancing. So this is the text here, that they look to Jesus, the man that is standing before them, that who's walking by, that they can see, and they ascribe to him what only God alone can do, heal. Jesus is not a doctor. He doesn't pretend to be a doctor, but he does simply go around healing the sick, giving sight to the blind, the lame can walk, and the dead are raised. These are activities that even doctors don't do without either a surgery or medication or whatever, and Jesus just simply does, ordering the dead to rise, as in the case of the son of the widow of the city of Nain. So this is ascribing to Jesus to be their boss. Sometimes the kids use the phrase, "You're not the boss of me," meaning that their parents shouldn't tell them what to do. I think that's what the kids mean. But when in fact, of course, the parents are their boss of the children. And in this case, these men who had this illness are saying, looking to Jesus, saying, look, health and illness both come from you. And we would prefer health rather than the illness that they currently were suffering from. And so Jesus decides to heal them. This raises the question then, in our time now, illness has struck so many. If we just look at our own country, the United States, we have over 6 million people who are directly affected by this disease that have been tested. And how many unknown millions more who may have had the disease and didn't even know it, or do currently and don't know it. Because this disease affects people, and sometimes we don't even notice symptoms. So, in a time where there's so much illness, not to mention the everyday illnesses, the cancers, the heart disease, the lung disease, and all the other standard illnesses that we typically cope with, these people look to Jesus as a God-man. The question that arises here for us is, who is our boss? These days, a lot of times, it seems that politics has risen to this level. People look to politicians to be some sort of one from whom help comes. When in fact, in times of illness, help actually comes from doctors and scientists, nurses and therapists. Politicians aren't much help when it comes to health. They are oftentimes a hindrance, especially in our country, since we are one of the few civilized countries without any uniform system of health care for the population of the country, about 320 million Americans, and again, we're one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have a unified healthcare. And yet, well, people look to doctors if they can afford them, or if they have health insurance, or nurses or hospitals to get help. And but underneath it all, who is ultimately your boss? This also comes down to our righteousness. How do we stand with the boss? Are we in good shape with the boss? It's kind of important. In the workplace, if your boss can't stand you, well, you're probably going to get fired. If you've been difficult or incompetent or inept or purposely lazy, well, then you can expect to get fired by the boss, because the boss's job is to make sure the work gets carried out effectively and efficiently as possible, considering all our human foibles and flaws. And yet the boss is tasked to maintain things. Jesus, when it comes to our case, our humanity, is the ultimate boss. He steps in and deals with our greatest problem between himself and ourselves. That is our failure, our flaw, our inability to love God perfectly, which is what God demands. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy strength, with all thy heart, with all thy mind, and with all thy soul, and thy neighbor as thyself. And we can't do that. No one can. But Jesus came in, the Son of God, this God-man, to do that, to love God perfectly, and he accomplished it. And just as sin came in by one, so grace came in by one. And so salvation is available for all. Just like sin spread to all, salvation is for all. That's a simple idea, that Jesus is the boss, even over sin and forgiveness. And he offers forgiveness to all, everyone. That's the nice thing about working for a company that has a universal health care plan for all its employees. If you work for that company, you're covered. Well, with Jesus, with God, he's designed it so if you're human, you're covered. You don't even have to be religious or belong to a church at all. If you're a human being, you're already covered. This is essentially the message of the gospel. It's not that you have to jump through some hoop or do something. In fact, it's the opposite. The gospel is not about you at all. The gospel is about what God has done, not what you have done or will do. The gospel is about what God has finished 2,000 years ago, sending his Son to die for humankind, humanity, and hence, and living perfectly in the law and under the law for us in our place. So salvation is simply there for everyone. And the purpose of the church is simply to announce that to humankind, that this is something God has finished for us. So, who is your boss? Well, that's simple. God. And how does he help us? Because here in this text, eleison, which comes from eleo in Greek, means mercy or help. Help us, they cried out. And we look to God for the same thing. We need financial help in this world. We need medical help. We need help in so many thousands of ways. Everything from the garage door doesn't close right anymore to who knows? It could be just anything. Having a hard time trying to figure out schooling for the children. And of course, until there's a vaccine and everyone can become immune to this thing, it's kind of a ludicrous adventure trying to send kids back to school when last year, of course, we didn't have school anywhere. And we're about to get to that same point again because, of course, the virus spreads. So, who is our boss? Who is your boss? Well, from whom do you seek help? Well, God. simply put. And has God decided to stop helping us? No, he's still helping us. He helps us every day. I'm still breathing. My heart's still pumping. He helps. And when he changes his mind, that'll be the end of my days. And that's up to the boss. That's one of his things. He makes alive and he brings down to the grave. He heals and he brings illness. All these things are his. And so who is our boss? Well, it's not politicians, that's for sure. It's the one who actually can and does help. God. When it comes to politicians, they should be a help. They should be. They should use reason and logic to equitably dispense justice and assistance to a whole population, whoever is their population. That's what a politician and government is called to do. That's why God established government in our midst. It doesn't really matter who the face is, or it shouldn't matter. Good government, doesn't matter who runs it. Men, women, whatever, doesn't matter. People who are to do the right thing and mean to do the right thing will simply do that. And we hope that in our country as well, we have government run by people who simply mean to do the right thing rather than selfish things or incompetent things or things that are truly misguided. That's the calling of government by God, because even government is there to eleo, as in this Greek text, to help. But ultimately, who is the true epistata? Well, that's Jesus, Son of the Father. The Father has sent him to be our brother, to be our helper, to be our friend. And in this time, if you're looking for that, a helper, a brother, a friend, well, that's who Jesus is. Is he your epistata, your boss? Well, yeah, he already is. He made you. He's already redeemed you, died for you on the cross. He rose again to assure you of life everlasting and your own resurrection, and lives to help you each and every day. So call upon him, just like these people did, and say, hey, boss. And with expectation, they called in the imperative, and I think that's something we have the right to do as well, and say, hey, help us. You made us. We're your people, as in all the world being your people. Doesn't matter who. And so we have the right to call upon you, God, and you should help us. And whatever your choices are, well, that's up to you. How you help us, again, up to you. But we always have the right to call upon you to help. Well, that's the text from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. If we focused on verse 13 today, and they lifted up their voices and said, Jesus, Master, epistata, boss, have mercy or help us. So, hopefully this little meditation has been some assistance or help for you, and that your epistata, God, will smile upon you and help you as he sees fit. And, well, I hope you have a good day. Take care. Again, this is retired Pastor Karl Schmidt. Bye-bye.